Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this narration of the web series Solo Apocalypse. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed in the description. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 27. We sat around a fire, and I recalled Rose having sparked one to life. If her class had something to do with fire, as evidenced by the firebolt, then it made sense. I was sitting on a log, surreptitiously glancing at the others over a kebab of glistening gleam tiger meat. Apparently, Jack had a skill that allowed him to determine if something was edible. Technically, I had one too, but this method was much more convenient. Elsewhere in the sleepy wood, my clones were on reconnaissance. The increased perception was tangible, every sound and movement somehow more pronounced. There was a layer beneath the eerie quiet of the woods, a sound unheard, like a buzz of insects lost in the monotony. A clone dodged forward as a snarling thing appeared. This time, it was an oddly lithe creature, having been pressed against the shadow of the tree. Two arms came down into scythes, and its bugger-like eyes were complemented with horns. Its arm came down, aimed for my neck. Idly, I noticed I wasn't panicking. I saw it strike, traced the path in the moment between moments. I was processing it faster. Much faster than I should. It was taller than me, hunting me, but I never faltered. Sixth dodged again, coming to his feet in half surprise. Then seventh came, beating away from the tree line and approaching from behind. From the other side, eighth and ninth, until suddenly it was surrounded. The sides came down again, but I had a view from 4 different angles. I watched myself dodge, never in danger for a moment. Mastery of the singular space unparalleled, an itch across all my senses, solar instinct working in tandem across all my clones, amplified even. None of my clones had any weapons, and if not for the title and boost to my physical stats, my numbers wouldn't have meant much. As it stood, my clones reached the physical attributes of my prior original self, and then a bit more. Each of my cells weaved between the strikes, and I didn't freeze or panic. Locked in a state of flow. I didn't hesitate to get close, oddly confident at being untouched. I grappled the creature down, clone staring at its limbs with a foot on its joints and pulling with both arms, multiple arms at a time. It died quietly, without a sound, and left 4 Evans coming down from adrenaline. Dungeon notice. For defeating a glooming scythe, you are rewarded a dark wand. Notice. Congratulations, as you are part of the first group to explore the Sleepy Wood. The Dark Wand reward has been upgraded to Twilight Wand. Item, Twilight Wand. A wand crafted from moon-soaked wood. It is perfect for harnessing and scattering rays of the dawn, the soft glow of twilight, and the shadows of dusk. Minus 20% increase in the effectiveness of twilight, light, and dark magic. I stared down at the item, a shot of excitement at the thought of magic. But the wand itself didn't declare any support towards learning. There wasn't anything immediately obvious when holding it. No surge of power or mysterious arcane knowledge. I looked at the wand in my hand, amounting currently into nothing more than a stick. It was a little disappointing, but I held hope, allowing a clone to experiment with it. Back with my original body, we were discussing the nature of the dungeon. I think it's an open space, Vixen was saying. I'm not sure if we're supposed to defeat anything. We can leave whenever we want, but that will be the end of our bonuses. I tore into my kebab and tried to ignore the thoughts so intently directed towards me. He hasn't said anything. I wonder what he can do to have escaped that thing. Rose shuffles beside me, and I felt her gaze lift for a moment. That being said, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some kind of dungeon boss, Rickson added, to the effect of uncomfortable shuffling. Risk and reward, Barker intoned, crossing his arms. He was wearing a furred vest that would have looked entirely out of place if we hadn't seen him pull it out of a common chest. It was blue, and I couldn't pull up a description on it. Apparently, it was gloom tiger hide. Well, now that we're here, we have no choice but to make the most of it, Gary said gruffly. It may seem greedy, but I don't think we can afford to leave empty-handed. Not with so much to gain. How long are we talking? Someone asked, concerned. Days at least. This time I recognized Jack. We're leveling, getting useful items. If everyone comes out stronger, we've got more tools to survive once we leave. We can't let an opportunity like this go to waste. So what? We just hunt, Go out, search for monsters, and kill them." "It might be for the best," Parker replied. There were a few murmurs, and I listened to that buzzing noise, that frequency of thought. It was strange, grabbing snippets of internal monologue, less daunting now that I had practiced at close proximity. The general sentiment was agreement and nervousness. I directed my mental focus on Rose, whose thoughts were already hard to ignore, reaching for that mental equilibrium where all other noise was filtered and only a clear stream of thought remained. Would have been impossible without the increase in mental stats. "Evan, what do you think of all this?" she asked once the conversation died down and people spread out. "He seems oddly relaxed. Is he not nervous?" I glanced at her, catching curious blue eyes. "Someone has to make this first step, right? I don't think we can survive without getting stronger. There's no telling what else is out there in the swamp. Or at least in the world, for that matter." "He's right, you know," Parker joined, holding a skewer over the fire. "People need to see that, for their own good." He nodded to me politely, and I felt his gaze linger before he turned back to the fire. "He's stronger than he looks. He was the first person saving people, and he somehow knew how to deal with the root mother's hive mind control." His gaze flicked back to me. "I'm glad he's here, at least." I scratched my head. "Well, let's hope we can make our time here worthwhile." End of chapter. Chapter 28. It was the second day since I'd entered the Sleepywood. I still retained a connection to the clones outside. First, who was the furthest clone from me, was still with Nicholas, Jonathan, and the group from the library. Clones second through fifth were right outside the dungeon, observing the survivors. My multi-individualism allowed me an unparalleled perspective. The survivors were splintering, and clear camps were being formed, groups of people with different interests. I suppose it made sense, considering the sheer number of them. More people could fit into a skyscraper than one would think. A large, coherent group would be ideal, but people had conflicting interests, confident in the powers they had despite everything that had happened. It didn't need to read minds to see the trauma. Nearly everyone that had been under the effects of root mother hive mind had scars along their spinal column, extending up towards their head and down towards their lower back. Scars that weren't just physical. In the chaos, some were taking advantage of this weakness. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" A weary old man croaked. Second, fourth, and fifth glanced around a decently large tent. Thick branches formed the support. A layer of leaves served as makeshift walls. Flimsy, but one of the few structures against the elements. "I heard that you could make simple clothes. Rumor had it that this man, Ralph, was a craftsman, or something in that vein. Do you have anything to cover the head?" "That I can," he replied, crossing his arms. His gaze flicked to fourth and fifth, their faces covered by the hoodies every clone came with. It was a half-hearted measure, but no one had bothered to look too closely, let alone the small number of times the clones were ever in the same place. Revealing my face was something I had every clone avoid whenever possible. "Not for free. I need..." Fourth hefted a waterfowl on a shoddy wooden table, laying it across its belly. Food was a commodity now, most survivors not knowing how to hunt or scavenge. The bird was enough to feed a handful for a day. Ralph glanced at the animal for only a moment. "That'll do." Then he reached below the table and retrieved 3 cloaks, amongst a crate of other garments. The clones took the clothes, feeding their weight. Ralph eyed us, me, as I inspected the garments. 3 pairs of hands turning over the cloth, tracing the stitching and material. Mundane items, as opposed to the ones recognized by the system. They were good. "Got some kind of hunter class or skill?" he asked curiously. "Strange group," I heard him think. "They're not with the recruiters, are they?" "Something like that," one of me responded, whirling the cloak over my neck and securing it. The others did the same. "There's talk among the camps of leaving. Know anything about that?" "Sure," Ralph snorted. "Fool's errand, in my opinion. There's a group going around recruiting anyone over level 5, or with a noteworthy class. They plan to leave when the safest place is right here. If you ask me, we should be fortifying what damn little we have." His voice raised, smacking the table. "This isn't a damn game, no matter how it might convince you." Memories flashed through my head, making me grimace. I couldn't agree more, I replied, leaving the tent. Previously, each clone had taken towards a mass of survivors, spread out amongst them, watching, waiting for something, for someone to take charge or a defined group to appear. And they had, if only in small numbers, the same people around a campfire, a pair of strangers, etc. I'd have asked Ralph for context, but the truth was I already was aware of two major parties, representing two primary choices, to stay or to go. The latter poaching off potential talent or able bodies, seeking unique classes or useful skills. They were typically leaving older folks, lower-level people, and non-combat classes alone, which in turn formed those more willing to stay. Their people wasn't anyone amongst the survivors with knowledge of classes like I had. There was, however, enough talk, introspection, and speculation to fuel everyone's thoughts. Thoughts that rose to the surface and, understandably, monopolized someone's mind enough that I could skim them at my relative leisure. It was the nature of anyone to question their reality and find understanding. Of course, people had their own ideas and opinions regarding the nature of classes. I formed my own after considering them all. A class, generally, had something to do with the person's background. Not everyone had one, and I noted people with a class were actually in the minority. I'd caught wind of maybe 8 people who had one, including Rose and Jack, across all my clones listening, though there were probably a bit more considering the nature of my senses, but it was still among hundreds of survivors. Having a class gave someone a focus for their skill acquisition and abilities. They represent an increased intuition, prowess, competency, and ease regarding a particular field. Everyone else had some sort of general skill, one that normally corresponded to some character trait or aspect of their person, though not as encompassing enough to merit a class. The skill itself reflected that. Usually, it was something minor, relative to a class skill. I'd heard, and in some cases seen, the likes of inner strength, acute sense, deft hands, and hard body, and more. I had my own thoughts regarding the matter. Those general skills seemed less focused than anything I had. Since those people were without a class, I wondered what might happen to such skills if they managed to get one, and if such skills were attainable outside the focus of my own class. I knew that it was possible for the same reason that I could read minds, telepathy. The fact I had obtained a skill as a reward meant skills were attainable outside of leveling. I doubted such a thing would be easy, but the fact remained. With Ralph's cloaks, I could keep my face shrouded better than to the hoodies alone. It didn't exactly lend itself to trustworthiness, but that wasn't my goal. I was a faceless watcher, observing events as they happened in the camp. Small details about skills, classes, and the strange system brought on by the apocalypse cropped up with the sample size so large. Every clone of mine was a sponge absorbing information. Inside the sleepy wood, they served as extra hands and extra eyes, hunting while I tested my new limits. There was innate synchronicity across all my clones, a single frequency of consciousness, rhythm, and thought. I could lift a finger and every clone would do the same, at the exact same time. I could close my eyes and walk across the ground with confidence if another of mine was watching. I knew myself was only another set of eyes and could know. My coordination was exceptional. Sixth leaned backwards, hair rustling with a scythe limb passing overhead. He, along with 7th, 8th, and 9th, kept their distance from the main, non-clone group, close enough to aid but far enough to pass unnoticed. I stood on the sideline, eyes flicking across the glooming scythe's body, watching its movements as all my other selves did. 4 perspectives, one all-knowing combatant. I watched its stance shift and I understood the mechanics of its body, the motion of its muscles and joints. I could process the movement, see the application of force. And 6th stepped to the left. A combination of intense precision, foresight, and Solo's instinct all worked together, such that a lethal strike missed by bare inches. It was exhilarating. A rush like no other, cheating death by mere inches. I was both dancer and choreographer, leading my opponent everywhere. I stepped into the thing's range, closing the distance. My arm braced against its back, and 2 other me's were suddenly there, pinning its arms at the shoulders. The 3rd clone grabbed its head, snapping it at the neck. I stood over a corpse and yawned, hands in my pockets. Nearby, the rest of the group had fallen into a rhythm. Parker, with the vanguard, served as first contact. My increased perception did more than affect my clones. Now that I knew what to look for, I'd spotted at least 4 ambushes already, eyes always on the trees. Rose stayed back, and there hadn't yet been a moment in my intervention was needed. My role was strictly to watch our rear. Rose had a particularly interesting class, Mage. It was information that hadn't been volunteered. Rather, she'd been thinking of it quite loudly when there was time to think, as everyone did. It gave me something to think about regarding the sheer scope of classes in general. Magic. I'd already confirmed the possibility just by encountering the Twilight Wand, an item a clone of mine still had not managed to make any breakthroughs with. Yet, it teased the mind with thoughts of what someone could do if they survived. Parker stepped over another defeated creature, a glow beast going by the dungeon notices. It seemed that people directly participating in the creature's downfall were most likely to level, lending credence to the type of contribution reward system. As for actual material rewards, these single creature encounters were only rewarding us with minor items. I was beginning to think Parker had some analog of the hard body skill. He was bearing the brunt of these creatures' attacks with surprising ease. Parker walked over to a tree, pulling something from the branches. "Glow pendant," he said. "Provides a light radius, wards off dark-type creatures." He shrugged, looking around. That first uncommon chest, apparently, had been something of a stroke of luck. From what I'd gathered, chests were more likely to contain higher quality items and had a chance to contain multiple. It was more common to gain single items and non-effectual ones than that. Nothing so immediately useful or powerful. I paused with such immediacy for the foes around me to notice. A hunch across all my senses, a sudden creeping intuition. Solar instinct was hissing at me, hushing whispers with all the intensity of a scream. My eyes shot across the entire group, looking for the threat, trying to understand what was going on. There's always been that feeling that it was all too easy, that killing these creatures and gaining rewards was too effortless. If there was anything I learned, it was that levels and valuables had to be paid for, in danger. The Sleepywood woke up. End of chapter. I would quickly like to thank the Tier 5 members, Marky, Cam Maxwell, Casper Arnholtz, Oakfield, Lord Azrakul, and It's Difficult to Pronounce. Thank you very much.